Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the match preview with me, Andrew Musgrove, and him, John Gibson. We're going to look ahead to Newcastle's visit to Everton and the Hill Dixon Stadium on Saturday evening. I really don't want to talk about another away fixture, but we're going to have to. Hopefully, we can find some positives and some light in what is always a gloomy conversation when Newcastle travel away from home. We are talking about Newcastle's visit to Merseyside on the back of a 2-1 defeat away to Marseille, another away game where they've taken the lead and been unable to hang on. We're going to talk about that and potential changes to the starting 11 for Saturday. But first things first, John, welcome back. You recovered from Tuesday evening yet?
No, and I think I won't recover until Newcastle win an away game. So I don't know if I'm going to have it for the next year or hopefully for just the next few days. But I mean, really, it's beyond a joke now. I mean, it's beyond a blip. It's a very bad habit Newcastle are in, and they've got to break it double quick, or this season's going down the pan. There's no question, because whatever you do at home, if you get beat away from home regularly, you're going nowhere fast.
Yeah, certainly so. I don't know if you've seen that Manchester United fan who's not cutting his hair until they win 5 on the bounce, which is a little bit ridiculous because I'm not sure how many teams actually have ever won 5 on the bounce. You have to be very, very good. And I don't think Man United are going to do it anytime soon. But I wonder if there's a Newcastle United fan out there planning to do the same, not going to cut their hair or their beard until Newcastle managed to win on the road in the Premier
Well,
League.
I think I did hear the Newcastle United fan, but it was until Newcastle draw on the road. I mean, we're not getting as extravagant as winning. We would settle for a draw at the moment. It is really, we've got to make light of it because we'd be in tears otherwise. But it really is a serious problem because, as you alluded to early on, the last three games, Marseille away from home, Marseille, Brentford, West Ham, 1-0 up in all three, 1-0 up in all three and lose. Now, there's something terribly wrong with the mentality of a team. They've got all the resistance of a chocolate fire god. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is beyond ridiculous. And there's a lot of reputations, and I'm excluding no one from this. There's a lot of reputations on the line. There's a lot of personal bubbles being burst.
Certainly so. I mean, we were hoping to talk about Everton on the back of at least a point down at the Velodrome in the south of France. You said if Newcastle managed to get a point there and then beat Everton, it would have been a fantastic week. And things were looking fine 6 minutes into the game in the Champions League, but then Newcastle sort of reverted back to type, and then the errors came into their game, Nick Pope especially, and we know what happened. Just sum up, John, your thoughts on the Marseille game before we do indeed look ahead to Everton.
Well, I think at the moment, Eddie's trying absolutely everything he can try to break this. I would call it a hoodoo, but it's not a hoodoo, it's a self imposed hoodoo. But I mean, he's trying different tactical formations, he's trying tub thumping, telling everybody how wonderful the team really is when they're at their best. And he's trying great loyalty to the players, but are they showing them the same loyalty back because they're dropping them in it big time? And yes, he come out with a lineup nobody expected down there in Marseille. He went not only five at the back, but went Livramento on his wrong side, left wing back. Murphy right wing back, always a bit of a problem, I feel, because he is a winger after all, and you're asking him to defend quite a bit when it's away from home. And Gordon up front, centre forward. Now, it worked a treat in the first half because Newcastle were compact, they got the early lead, they were compact, they were using the pace of the front three to get beyond them. Yes, Gordon never looks like scoring, but Harvey Barnes is as hot as it's a poker has been in the fire. He really is at the moment. But within 24 seconds of the beginning of the second half, it was all over. And 4 minutes later, it was literally all over. And I'm sorry to labour the point, but Nick Pope, please go away and go to sleep in a darkened room for a little while and wake up and you might have forgot about your nightmares. What on earth was he doing running that far out his penalty area onto that ball, especially with Aubameyang, who's very, very clever, has been everywhere, Chelsea, Arsenal, etc. He made Aubameyang's man up for him. He was never going to get there, went round him, and yes, it was an acute angle, but for a player of his quality, it was going to end in the net. And I'm sorry, that's one mistake too many from Nick Pope. I am sick of him. That one incident, 24 seconds, emphasising that, Andrew, because that's what changed the game. It was a whole different game after that. And we were dead in the water after that. And we've had those mistakes before. I can remember sitting at St. James's Park with my heart in my mouth on him doing exactly the same, and he just got away with it. It's not the first time he's run that far out of his goal. And it was a clanger. It wasn't a lack of concentration. It was a lack of good decision making. And he was shocking. And I'm sorry, he's got to go. Ramsdale's got to play.
I think nearly everyone watching and listening to this episode will agree with you. We've been calling for this change for many, many weeks, but then we always caveat it by saying, yeah, but what's Eddie Howe likely to do? And I'm sitting here, and to be brutally honest, I think Eddie Howe will stick with Nick Pope for the game on Saturday.
I mean, the Oxford Dictionary has been reprinted so that it says loyalty, and underneath what Eddie Howe shows to his players as the description of what the word means. Because that is what it means. And it's a good thing a lot of the time to show loyalty to players because it reassures them, etc., etc. But how about the players now showing loyalty to him? I remember years ago, a manager telling me, he said, Gibbo, he said, if you're loyal to players, they'll get you the sack. Now, I'm not talking about Eddie getting the sack. I hasten to add before anybody jumps on the bandwagon there. Not whatsoever. But what he meant was loyalty's got to be a two-way street. You show loyalty to players, their response will be they'll drop you in it. Whether it's deliberate or not, doesn't matter. They'll drop you in it. And we're getting to that situation with a couple of the Newcastle United situations. He's tried everything possible, and it hasn't worked away from home. Well, try being as brave as a lion now and just give some people what's coming.
Is it difficult, though, in that situation, as much as you and I and the majority of our audience will be calling for Aaron Ramsdale to be put in net on Saturday? It's not like taking an outfield player out of the starting 11, is it? Because you can easily rest and rotate. I mean, this is a huge decision. You know, if he takes Pope out and puts Ramsdale, and then that's likely it for that goalkeeping position. You could argue that is probably the end of Nick Pope's career at Newcastle in many ways. If you look at the bigger picture, like, is that fair? Is it a bigger decision to remove your goalkeeper than it is, say,
it is to a certain extent, but I don't go down that road. First and foremost, you can easily bring a keeper back. It's not unheard of, and I would never dream of saying it's the end of Nick Pope's career at Newcastle United if he doesn't play at Everton on Saturday. I think that is knee-jerk. The decision I'm asking to be made is not knee-jerk. It's been staring us in the face for game after game after game. Nick Pope is an excellent shot stopper, but he makes mistakes, and he makes mistakes more and more and more now. And you've got to look at it another way. Is it being disloyal to Nick Pope? Do you not do it because you don't know how you bring him back? You usually bring him back. Take him out the firing line. Supposing he plays at Everton, what's he going to be like? Jittery? He's going to know the whole crowd don't want him there. The whole Newcastle United crowd, the whole Everton crowd will want him there. But he's going to know that anyway. So, is it doing him a favour to keep him in? And can I put the question absolutely turned round for Eddie Howe? Say, would it be disloyal in a mistake to take Nick Pope out? Would you have brought Ramsdale under false pretences, an England goalkeeper that played for Arsenal regularly, if you bring him here and in this situation he doesn't even get a chance? You've got to look at it from Ramsdale's point of view. Should he not expect a chance? And I tell you what, if he doesn't get a chance, do you think he's going to stay at the end of the season and be covered next season to not play?
But all that being said, I go back to the original point I made, John. The team news, when it drops on Saturday evening, I'm fully expecting Nick Pope to be between the sticks.
Oh, we say that because we know that this guy is loyal. He's loyal beyond anything else. And it's a matter of each individual fan has got to decide whether that loyalty is an asset or a liability. But it's undisputed that there is loyalty. I mean, you would think that bless him, if Nick Pope had a physical attack on Eddie, he would still play him because he does that. We've said that about Byrne at left back. We've said it about severally. He is very, very, very loyal, and that can be a wonderful trait. But I'm sorry, enough's enough. And at the end of the day, the man under fire will become Eddie Howe, not Nick Pope, because people will say, I don't blame Nick Pope because he's a walking mistake, but I do blame the manager for going with him. And I'm not over dramatizing one situation. This has brought to a head a lot of situations. Newcastle United, in my humble opinion, are at a crossroads now where reputations count for nothing. This is not a blip. This is a crisis, the away form I'm talking about. This is not a blip. A blip is something. This is one win away from home in 7 months. This isn't a blip. It is. We have led in the last 3 away games and lost, not even managed to draw. And by the way, the opposition, Brentford, West Ham, and Marseille, wasn't top draw opposition whatsoever. Because Marseille on top draw. Look at what their Champions League record and look at their performance last night. They were carried by Aubameyang and they were carried by Greenwood. They're not a top European side. And if Newcastle don't make big, harsh decisions, it's going to come home and bite them. And it can't get, can I put it another way, Andrew? Can it get much worse away from home? Newcastle are consistent, They're consistently bad away from home.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to note is that the last 3 away games, as you've mentioned, they're taking the lead and then they've fallen behind it and ultimately lost. You've had 3 huge mistakes from Nick Pope in each one of those games, against West Ham, against Brentford, and then against Marseille. And as much as I think Eddie Howe will play him on Saturday, everyone else is asking, what more does Nick Pope have to do to be taken out of the side? And I think it is interesting that you mentioned, John, you can either take him out of the firing line with a view to him coming back in and just let him sit out and miss out on all that criticism and attention that's currently on him, because you're right, as soon as he gets that first ball into his feet on Saturday evening, you're half expecting to be kicked out because it's Nick Pope, but also because there is all those eyes and attention on him. And then on the other hand, you take him out with a long-term view to having Aaron Ramsdale as your number 1 going forward. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. But certainly looking at the last 3 away games, I mean, I just can't see a justification for keeping Nick Pope in net.
No, and I mean, it's not as dramatic as you'll never darken our doorstep again or anything like that. I mean, people do lose form and get dropped. Joe Linton loses form and gets dropped. So does everybody. However good you are, at some stage you'll be pulled out the firing line and put back in. I don't think that if Nick Pope didn't play on Merseyside, that would be the end of his England career. Far from it. I think for his own sake, as well as Eddie's sake, and as well as the rest of the team, privately, as much as they love Nick as a bloke because he's a lovely, lovely man, privately they'll be worried every time the ball goes behind them. What's going to happen here? Is this going to be a clanger? It's not doing the team any good at all. And it's got to be addressed. I mean, the only 2 people that are rating poor old Nick Pope at the moment is Eddie and Thomas Tuchel, who's put him back in the England squad as his 3rd choice goalkeeper and dropped James Trafford for the last internationals, which then it was overtaken by Pope getting concussion. But it's obvious that he is seen as the number 3 goalkeeper because Trafford's never playing in the Premier League and Pope's playing regularly in the Premier League. So he'll be Tuchel's number 3. So he can go to the World Cup. And at the same time, we are asking for him to be dropped by his club. What a contradiction there is there.
Yeah, it's a funny old game, isn't it? Football. We'll talk about the rest of the team in a moment. Just a reminder that this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. You can click the link in the podcast description box to get a discount offer on your plan. There's no risk with a 30-day money-back guarantee. One subscription can be used across 10 devices. Keep yourself safe while browsing on public Wi-Fi. And before we start talking about the rest of the starting 11 for Saturday, John, there's been questions raised over the starting 11 that was picked on Tuesday. Now, in the match preview for that game, we said, don't be surprised if Lewis Hall doesn't play. Don't be surprised if Gordon starts up top and there's a change in the midfield. And, you know, these things happened. We called it right. And I had no issue with Dan Burn starting. I had no issue with Gordon starting and no issue with Joe Willock starting. In an ideal world, would those be my 3 picks? Of course not. But I looked at what Eddie Howe had to work with. I look at what's coming, and we talked about what is the priority. Is it Tuesday night? Is it Saturday evening? When you saw that team news drop, John, I mean, I don't know about you, but instantly it was kind of like, yeah, I think Saturday is probably the priority. But it wasn't like a alarm bell. It wasn't like an overall
No, it wasn't.
feeling.
No, it wasn't.
I
heightened the point in the last podcast is Eddie's got to decide, is it Marseille or is it Everton? Or it's more important. I was thinking in terms particularly of the 2 young fullbacks who won't be able to play in all 3 right from the start, etc. And I thought Livramento on his wrong side, bless him, struggled a little bit against Weir coming up and Aubameyang going down that side and Greenwood. It was a tough day for him, but I was quite happy with the side. And at half time, by the way, it was a masterclass, a tactical masterclass at half time, because they'd handled it brilliantly. And but for Nick Pope, it might have gone on and been that. And I was particularly not concerned about it when the one doubt I had was relieved when I saw them line up, and that was that Byrne played left side centre half in a 3 rather than left back. I would have been concerned with him playing left back, but he wasn't playing left back. He was playing left side of a 3. So no, and I remember watching the television. Glenn Hoddle for me, regardless of whether he's a good commentator, a good presence, his reading of a game of football is tremendous. And that was always his great strength as a player and his great strength as a manager. Tactically, he's very switched on. He knows what it's about. He was gurgling into the night air about how well Eddie had done with his tactics and how well Newcastle had carried out those tactics in the first half. 20 seconds after the start of the second half, he was choking on his half-time sandwich, right? Because Newcastle had given it away so much. And then it's all changed. You're going to a flat back because 2 minutes later, they got another one. So it all changed and everything was out the window. But no, I wasn't concerned about the tactics, which I thought worked to a certain extent, greatly helped by the fact we got the early goal. But on the counter, we could have scored again and again, Andrew, in that first half. On the counter, it was like the cavalry charge at times. They had so many people up, and we countered with about 4 charging down the pitch. And on occasions, the final ball wasn't all it should have been. But no, the tactics didn't bother me. The mistakes bother me.
Yeah.
And by the way, Pope wasn't the only guy to make a mistake. I mean, but his was the most glaring. I mean, we kicked off the second half and lost the ball twice, and the ball was in the back of our net in 20 seconds. So before it got to Pope, mind you, all that would have been forgotten if Pope had stayed on his line and just narrowed the angle, because it wouldn't have been a goal. But there were other mistakes.
And looking at the rest of the starting 11, I've written 2 teams down here, the team that I would go for and the team that I think Eddie Howe will go for. So for me, Ramsdale would be my pick in goal. Livramento on the right, Chow and Cher in the centre with Lewis Hall at left back. I'd play Miley, I'd play Tonali, and then I'd play Ramsey. I would play Barnes on the left, Voldemort up top, and then it's a bit of a flip of a coin between Murphy and Elanga. Murphy had a poor game, I thought, on Tuesday, but he wasn't the only one, and of course, that's not really the right position to get him at his best.
Tell me what recall your midfield 3, Andrew, for me again.
Miley, Tonali, and Ramsey.
I thought you said that. So you would drop Bruno and Joe Linton from the league lineup. You would drop both of them.
Yeah, I think Bruno's looking tired. He was particularly poor on Tuesday. And, none of the passes were coming off, and it's hard after you've given everything against Man City and you performed so well, and everyone stood up and went, that's the Bruno who's worth 100 and odd million quid. But a bit like Newcastle this season, we've seen him hit some highs and then straight away just fall away, especially away from home. That's he seems to be following the trait of Newcastle United, and it just didn't work for him. And I think more than anything, he just looked tired. So just wondering whether it would be, right to take him out of the side against Everton on Saturday. And look, if Newcastle have got options in abundance in one position, it is in midfield. Lewis Miley coming on at right back against Marseille reaffirms the issues Eddie Howe's got in defence. But in midfield, they've got so many options. And I think Miley can bring that bit of technicality to the centre. Ramsey can bring the kind of the creativity, and Tonali can sit back and just pull the strings in a bit more of a deeper role. And that for me would be my midfield three.
That's fascinating. And I wondered why you said you had two sides. I wondered why to a certain extent when you said, well, I've got my side and I've got Eddie Howe's side. Now I know why you've got two sides, because I'm not having to go at your side. I can follow your reasoning absolutely 100%. But we also know 200% that's not the side Eddie will pick.
Yeah, 100%. I've got the side that Eddie Howe will play now.
One,
Nick Pope, Tino, Chow. I think Dan Burn will come in alongside Malik Chow on Saturday. Lewis Hall. I actually think he'll play Joe Linton, Bruno, and Tonali across the middle, with Murphy, Barnes, and Valdemar up front. I think he'll be loyal to kind of the players that he's picked for the majority of this season.
I can follow both teams, Andrew, without a shadow of doubt. The one certainty is that the two young fullbacks will start. I've got a feeling that Byrne will start ahead of Shaw as the centre back. Obviously, I would start Ramsdale. And I think the midfield three is probably the usual midfield three. And to a certain extent, I'm desperate to see that shaken up a little bit with a lick of paint, a fresh lick of paint. But I don't know that we'll get it. And yes, I think the side you picked as Eddie's side will be the side Eddie picks. Yes, I do.
On Bruno, would you choose to rest him, or do we need him in the side?
Wonderful question, that, because I hadn't considered him being rested, because he would be furious and Eddie's loyal. So I don't think there's any chance of it happening. If I had to rest one of the front three, I would rest Joe Linton, even though he didn't play the other night and didn't come on, because I think he's been below par this season. Somehow, Bruno seems to pull something out the back of the hat in terms of energy and desperation to play, etc. He manages to do that. We have got three backup players who, in theory, in midfield have all got something, in terms of Miley, in terms of Ramsey, and in terms of Willock. And yet, for me, there were one significant step down on the other three when the other three are on blob, which they're not necessarily at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what he does there. And why it'll be interesting, in my opinion, Andrew, is because midfield it'll be won and lost. Because where Everton are at their strongest is midfield. If you think of Grealish midfield, Nidai, and Drewsbury Hall, I think they are strong in that sort of area, with players that play in that area, because Grealish does a lot. The hopeless up front would have got two number 9s to pick from, in Barry and Beto. Neither of them could burst a paper bag. Having said that, they'll score 2 against Newcastle, of course, because I've said that. But what they need, and all Everton fans would tell you that, is a centre forward to give them a real chance, because Barry is very, very raw and hasn't scored yet, and Beto works hard but has no imagination whatsoever. So, their hope is what they've got in midfield. So how we match up there is crucial.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I did ask our viewers and listeners to send in their starting 11s and highlight any changes they would make. Craig said, apart from in goal, it's time for Gordon to be dropped. Ryan says Nick Pope has to come out. Botman comes in for Burn. Gordon out for Voldemort. And he says he would also drop Bruno because he looks knackered. So let us know in the comments your thoughts on the starting 11 to come on Saturday. I mean, Everton are a funny side. I think I'm enjoying seeing David Moyes have success after the way he was treated at West Ham. And it was a weird one watching the game on Monday because I always like to see Manchester United lose, and especially in wonderful circumstances like that when they've had 80-odd minutes against 10 men at home and they can't get the better of them. But then I was looking at the league table and I'm thinking, actually, we really don't want Everton to win here. They're currently sitting 3 points ahead of Newcastle. Obviously, if they win that game on Saturday, then that goes to 6, and that is something Newcastle United do not want another team to be chasing down. So it kind of is. It's a must not lose game, isn't it, John? But in many ways, it's a must win if that slight chance of top 4 is going to be achieved for Newcastle.
I mean, top 4 at the moment sounds like Fantasy Island, doesn't it? The way they're playing away from home, it really does sound like Fantasy Island. But yes, we've got to think that way. And the other thing, we always say must not lose, and you're right. I think that's moved to must win, because a draw is not good enough, you know. We're playing catch up. I mean, we're behind more often than the cow's tail. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, a draw is not good enough. It's not a must not lose situation. It's a must win situation. And the must, it's because we're running out of playing average sides. I mean, Brentford was an average side. West Ham was an average side. By European standards, Marseille's an average side. Everton's an average side. What's going to happen when we play the really big clubs away from home?
What do you think the issue is? I mean, what is the issue? We spoke about mentality. Obviously, you can chuck in as well the bad luck they've had with injuries to Wissa and now to Kraft and now to Trippier, and before that, you know, Hall and Livramento. But that is just football. That's something you have to deal with. I think the focus really has to be either on the approach, but you could argue against Marseille, you know, the approach worked for the first half. It was errors that ended up changing the course of the game. You could talk about this mentality because clearly there is an issue. You can't be going up 3 games in a row, 1-0, and then not picking up a single point from either one of those games. I mean, there is something up. But what is the main thing, John, and what is the solution?
Oh, I think the main thing's in between the ears, rather than tactically or whatever. It's and as I say, they've got all the resistance of a chocolate fire god. What I would find interesting, and I can't imagine this happening for 1 minute, I'd like Eddie Howe to give Unai Emery a ring. Can you imagine that? Because Unai Emery just about had his job at Newcastle. But if you remember, they were in a very similar thing at the start of the season to Newcastle. They couldn't buy a result. We got a note down there when we didn't have a centre forward simply because they were all at sea. They'd got rid of a couple of big hitters in the summer. They'd not got a couple of signings that they wanted. They were thought Martinez might be going. They thought Watkins might be going. The results were horrible, and everybody was forecasting that the Emery bubble has burst, that Aston Villa are part of yesterday. They're not going to do anything this season. And it really looked that way. And the mood around Villa Park was very negative. And all of a sudden, Emery, with some magic wand that he must have bought at Lidl's or somewhere, he waved it, and there we go. They went back. They've gone back to their old self and are now winning all their games, now back up the top. We've got to do what they've done. We've got to do what they've done. And perhaps Eddie could ring Emery and say, you know, that's Stardust. Would you mind just sending a bit up in the post to St. James's Park? I'll pay you well for it. Because we've got to find an answer. He found an answer. It is up to good managers, and Eddie Howe is a good manager. Part of the job's to find an answer. And he's got to find an answer to this. But it's a mental thing as much as it's physical. It's not necessarily tactics. I mean, what Pope did wasn't tactics. It was stupidity. It wasn't getting tactics wrong. And other players, and Pope's done that more often than that one game, and other players have made some dreadful mistakes and are perhaps hiding behind Nick Pope at the moment. But we've somehow got to get into their minds and we've got to give them a backbone, because at the moment they've just got jelly there, not a backbone.
I guess when I'm talking about tactics and approach, my thought is about how the fact that you go 1-0 up, and against Marseille, it wasn't as same as it was against West Ham and Brentford, because against West Ham and Brentford, they kind of just sat back, went into the shell a little bit, and basically just invited those two teams on to attack, and look what happened. Against Marseille, there was signs of intent in that first half to try and get a second goal. Just before Marseille's second goal, they had the ball in the back of the net and it was ruled out for offside, rightly. So I think it is slightly different. However, there is that undercurrent of what happens when Newcastle United go 1-0 up. Is there a problem with the instruction? I think there is certainly a problem with mentality, but do we also have to look at the instruction? And is the instruction to sit back and absorb and hit on the counter, when really against these lesser sides, or sides you should be beating if you're Newcastle United looking for top 4 football, you should be on the front foot looking to get a second, looking to get a third, especially against a West Ham or a Brentford. Everton's a little bit different because the feeling's quite good around the place. But that's what I kind of meant with tactics and approach.
You're totally right. And what's alarming is that Newcastle, I think, got the tactics pretty well spot on in the first half. They had that 4-minute, 5-minute spell at the beginning of the second half when they leaked 2 goals. But after that, you knew we were dead, didn't we? We knew we were dead. They run up a white flag. When things are against them, it's like, oh dear me, the whole world's against us. Here we go again. Feel sorry for ourselves, etc., etc. Whereas you want desperate Dan, don't you? That rolls up his sleeves beyond his shoulder blades and gets stuck in and produces some results. I can tell what you mean about perhaps. Now, even in the first half, when I thought defensively we looked strong, etc., when we missed some on the counter, I thought this can come back and bite us, because even though we've been comfortable all first half, we've only got a 1-goal lead. And really, that's one of the other problems. Yes, the defence, if you look at the obvious, the defence is in disarray because we're letting in 2 or 3 goals every away game. But we're missing a lot, Andrew, as well. Our percentage of taking chances is so poor, Harvey Barnes apart, is so poor that that's got to be improved enormously. There's an awful lot that's got to go right. But for me, for the tactics to go right, Andrew, you've got to have the right mentality. You can give them any tactics you want, but if the mentality is that they're soft as a bar of soap, then nothing's going to get through.
Yeah, certainly so. And we look at Everton at home, played 6, won 3, drawn 2, lost 1. So, they're quite decent at home. Of course, come into this game on the back of that great result against Manchester United. You've already mentioned a host of players, and Jack Grealish and Dai on the flanks. They, of course, will be without Trezeguet after that bizarre red card. But Garner in the middle, picked up from Manchester United a few seasons back. He's absolutely flourished under David Moyes. And if whoever starts them, and whether it be Bruno or Tonali or Julian, whoever it is, if they put in similar performances in like they did against West Ham and Brentford in the middle of the park, Garner's just going to pick them off. He's really found his form, and he's a dangerous player, even though he might not get the headlines. So they're going to have to really be on their best form to quieten that midfield and to win that battle. And I'm not really sure away from home they've got it in them, and that is a massive concern. But I guess all that will have to be done, John, is to predict the score, or predict the result rather.
Oh dear. I've been fearing this part of the podcast, to be truthful, Andrew. If I talk without my heart being involved in the discussion, Newcastle lose simply because they've got that sort of mentality at the moment, and they seem to accept it rather quickly once they're behind. The most I can hope for is a draw, and I'm hoping that by saying this, something unusual happens, like we were doom and gloom before Manchester City, and suddenly we beat Manchester City. But that was at home with 50,000 mad Geordies willing you on. By the way, how can we play like we do against Man City and then produce these abject performances with exactly the same players more or less involved in the game. How do we do that so often? I mean, we're not inconsistent. We're very consistent at doing the obvious, which is losing away and getting something at home. Um, I've got to go for a defeat, though. I'm really hoping for a draw. Um, but I'm really so depressed. I'm so battered. My hopes have risen during the last three away games when we got 1-0 up that we're going to win, or at the very least, we're going to get a draw, of course. And we haven't. We've been beaten by some distance in all three games. Now, why is that going to change on Saturday? I mean, the only hope we've got is the law of averages, not what we will do.
Yeah, I know it would be very Newcastle United for a game in which I reckon pretty much everyone is expecting them to lose because it is away from home, that they go and have an absolute stormer of an afternoon and beat Everton comfortably, and we're all smiling ahead of that game on Tuesday against Tottenham. However, I just can't see it happening. I just think there's too many issues away from home. And I said this last week, I think it's going to get worse on the road before it gets better. And it's maybe about just kind of digging
By the
in.
way, don't say that. The derby's coming up shortly.
I mean, I don't even want to think about the derby right now, John. I mean, actually, it's probably a good thing it's coming up because it's one of those games where form doesn't matter and Newcastle Stars will actually get up for it because it's one of those big games. But anyway, save that for a few weeks. Saturday, I've got to be honest, I think it's going to be a defeat. I think Newcastle, there's a good chance that they will follow the route they did at West Ham and at Brentford and at Marseille, where they'll get an early lead and they'll either shoot themselves in the foot through mistakes and then lose the game, or they'll sit off, invite Everton on. And when you've got players like Ndiaye and like Grealish, you know what's going to happen, especially away from home. So unfortunately, I'm going to go for a defeat, but I'm clinging to what you said, John. Every time we seem to predict a defeat, they end up getting a victory. So fingers crossed that happens on Saturday, and we'll wait and see. But cheers, John, for popping on and providing the match preview. Thank you to you guys for watching and listening. Hit thumbs up, hit subscribe on the channel, get into the comments, leave us a rating and review. Make sure to take advantage of your discounted NordVPN plan by clicking the link in the podcast description box. Check out the View from the Opposition on Friday morning, and he is hoping to an unlikely 3 points against Everton on Saturday evening.